right off the bat, everybody has been given the God-given right to maximize your success path, what it is that you're to achieve in life. And everybody has abilities. Nobody has the same type thing, but everybody does have an ability inside of them. And unfortunately, the issue is that we've had roadblocks placed in our way, right in front of our path. But you know what? We're going to talk about today how you can get rid of those roadblocks. But in order to do that, you first have to figure out where are you on this path of success, and what are those roadblocks. You have to identify that before you can move forward. But I'm telling you, once you do identify that, it's easily achievable, and you'll see that as we go through this today. One of those main roadblocks we're going to talk about and discuss thoroughly is the public school system or the standard school system, and that is what Chris was just talking about. What they teach, subjects like algebra, calculus, chemistry, history, all these things, unless you fit into a very small niche. Of course, we have scientists and the chemists and things like that, mathematicians and professors, but unless you fit into that small niche, these different topics have very little to do with you, and so that is time wasted. And let's face it, time is one of our most valuable resources. I'm sure you've heard that before, but has it really sunk in that every minute of every day can be used to accomplish something? Just as Chris said, you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. And so time is a very, very important thing. We can't manage time, but we can manage ourselves within time. And so it's really important to know what else there is here. And time being wasted is a big enough issue, but there's more to it than that. There's actually something intentional going on that has been going on for quite some time. It's the modern day school system. This was created at the beginning of the 20th century, and basically there is something. It's not just this conspiracy theory thing. I thought that kind of stuff, and I've always been against all the conspiracy ideas and stuff, because to me it was just a waste of time. But as I've developed education and just kept processing that, I've came to a conclusion, and I've seen it over and over again, and you can see the pattern for yourselves. The main thing is to start thinking for ourselves. And when you see the classroom setting being designed to produce, almost like a factory, employees, and this foundation, at least in the U.S., and I think it affects other parts of the world as well, was created by the Rockefeller Foundation, and this system has infiltrated into the very essence of our children learning. All of us that grew up in the last 115 years or so have been a part of this. 1 out of every 3 teachers receives their degree from this institution, this ran by this foundation. And Rockefeller has been quoted to say, the best way to control society is through the educational process. Now, note those words, control society, and he thinks that it's to better help society, is what he's been known to say. Okay, hundreds of billions of dollars are spent every year to control the public mind, says Noam Chomsky. So these are people that are well-known people, and they're giving us a warning, and they're saying that ignorance is bliss is what they're trying to tell us. And so we say, you know what, sometimes that maybe we just don't need to know. But Martin Luther King Jr. said, nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And then you have Jim Rohn, which most of you out here, anyone in the network industry probably has heard that name. He said ignorance is not bliss, ignorance is poverty, ignorance is devastation, ignorance is tragedy, and ignorance is illness. It all stems from ignorance. However, I do agree ignorance is bliss, but it's only bliss for those who are capitalizing on it, and unfortunately that is not the majority of people. Most people decide to be in ignorance, and they think that it's better to be that way, and other people are just smiling and just bring it on. They want us to be in ignorance. So your ignorance is their power, and the government, they applaud this employee training process. Of course they do. It's funny how that works, but why do you think that is? Employees pay the highest taxes, income tax. When you learn to own business and operate in the business realm, you're dealing with all kinds of tax breaks, and some of the wealthiest people in the world actually get the smallest paychecks in the world, and there's a reason for that. With the paychecks, they're not, that's where you're paying income tax. And so there's other ways to being paid outside of that, and that's just the basics 101 on business. And I think probably most of you already understand that, but just want to put it together into what we're talking about here today. And so, during our school years, it is a programming process, and it's unfortunate that most people don't even know that's going on. And so why should we even talk about this topic? It seems like kind of a negative thing to even talk about. And here's the reason. We have to realize where our thoughts and acts derive from. If we don't know where our thoughts are coming from, then it's just a programmed thought. And that's where we get in trouble. So if we know where they're coming from and we know where we want to go, then all of a sudden we have the ability to face reality. And here's the true reality. It's your choice. If you don't get anything else out of this today, I want you to understand that in all these things, we do have a choice. Unfortunately, the programming thing we're talking about here is forced to say that you have to go down this path. This is the only path. You can't steer clear of this path. You have to go down it. That's not true. You do have a choice. So what is your choice? You can continue to be hand-fed. I mean, that's the most comfortable probably for most people, they think anyway. I mean, you don't have to make decisions. You just kind of go with the flow and go with the current, and that's how everybody else goes. So it's just easier. You don't run into things, and that's fine if you want to choose the path like that. Everybody has that choice. That's the point. Or you can start figuring things out for ourselves. We can do that. We can figure out and make choices. So basically what that means is we have to face some realities here. If we want to start figuring things out ourselves and not just go with the flow. Our modern school system, we're trained to be fearful, and if school you don't study, you're going to fail. You're going to be compared to other kids with grades, and that's, sets you up for failure. But everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear, so we must conquer fear. So how do we go about this thing here? Because, even as a student, you're afraid to fail. Now as an employee, you work out of fear. If you don't get your work done, you make a mistake too many times, there's a good chance you're going to be fired. So fear is all around us. But there's two meanings to fear. One of them is forget everything and run. That's what most people think. And these acronyms are pretty accurate, I think. Or number two is to face everything and rise, and the choice is yours. Now here's something that I've dealt with myself, and it says if you live in fear of the future because of what happened in your past, you'll end up losing what you have in the present. And I know I spent a good majority of my childhood always thinking about the future, always thinking, worrying about some things or trying to plan for other things. And I spent so much time with my mind focused on something that's not even real because it hasn't happened, that I actually was not happy in my present. I was actually miserable. And so it was all mainly based around a fear of what's going to happen. So here's a better way to approach that. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Freedom from this thought process, that the one that we're taught in school, the fear things, stay in line. If you don't stay in line, this will happen. That's the fear that they're bringing in without so much saying it. Freedom from this allows you to have an open mind. And then once your mind is open, it allows you to learn, and then you become productive, and productive creates success. Productive helps society. Productive helps yourself. And so it's really important. And then once you're productive, now all of a sudden you have more choices in front of you. You don't just have that singularity path. You have other paths that just start popping up. And now all of a sudden life is fun because you have choices, fun choices. Should you do this and become wealthy, or should you do this? I mean, different things that open up for you. It's amazing. And it doesn't mean fear won't crop up. It happens. It's always going to happen. Everybody on this earth, some people seem so confident you think that, oh, they don't have fear. They have fear too. Everybody does. It just means that fear won't own your thoughts. It won't own you. You can overcome it when it comes to your mind. And this gives you the freedom to face your fears. And then once you're able to do that, now you've become a problem solver. And not only a solver of your own problems, but a solver of other people's problems. And we'll talk about in a little bit why that's important. John Wayne says something here that's really good. He says, courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. That's what it's all about. Once you decide to do that, now you have freedom, so you break the chain. Courage is a French word, and it's derived from the word heart. So I would encourage each one of you to take heart, take action, take control of your life. You can make the choice to do what you want to do. And remember, it's your choice. And then, we're talking about this thing about another reality, and I just want to dig just a little bit deeper just so we can kind of grasp and get into our minds to see, even the best of us, we think sometimes we've got most of those things conquered. Now, I was just thinking about what Chris was saying at the beginning, that he wakes up and he chooses to say, you know what, I don't know anything, so then you're able to learn something. And I think the digger we deep into our minds, we can find out there's more things. There's always more these bad mindsets that we can pull out and replace with something good. It says, keep calm and get a real job. You know, personally, I've been told this. It says, you know, I've had people say, why don't you go get a real job? And so I just think it's funny, you know, when they say that, you know, wait a minute, wait a minute. Is that a genuine thought, or is that a programmed thought? When they say that, I don't take it personal when someone says that, because when they say that to me, they're just saying what they've always been taught, and they're afraid to do it, so they can't comprehend why somebody else would be willing to do something outside of the normal employee atmosphere. And so that's how I look at it, and that's how I perceive it. So it's really an okay thing. But let's think about this for a minute. If I was to go get a real job, who is employing me? And is this money that this non-employee entrepreneur is paying me, is that money real money? These are just little thoughts that you can just, all you have to do is just think for yourself for a minute, and then it makes more sense. I want to go back here about 115 years, and I want to talk about what it was like before the system was instituted, the system of training up employees. Most people were self-employed. It was somewhere between 8 and 9 out of 10 people were actually self-employed. And that means that leaves about, I'll say 15% of the population that were employees. And am I saying anything's wrong with being an employee? Absolutely not. We need employees, and some people are gifted at being employees. They love just being around other people and working for other people. Some people have that kind of a heart. And so that means that they are operating in a gift that they have, and they feel successful in doing so, and that means they are successful. So we need those employees. However, does that mean that everybody should be trained to be employees? I would say absolutely not. And I can tell you this because I can look out and I can see miserable employees everywhere you go. I mean, you can fly on an airline, you have a miserable stewardess or something, and they can tend to make everybody around them miserable. They don't like their job. And so back in this era, they were little ma-pa type places, you know, like you see in this picture. You know, there's a whole bunch of different store fronts right here in this little building, and that is the essence of what makes up a good industry. And it basically expands like a large middle class, which always makes it makes a country more successful. That makes a whole community and a whole nationality successful. But what happened is a few got greedy and decided, you know, they're going to change things a little bit, and so they infiltrated the system without people even knowing it. And so being employed, it isn't a career choice, it's a lifestyle choice. It's something that is totally different than what, you know, we've learned in school. So again, like I said, being employed is not a bad thing. It's just there are, if you're not supposed to be in that kind of a system, it creates a negative mindset. And then what we're trained to be in is where it becomes wrong. And that is, employees have a dependent mindset. They're looking for security from outside rather than from inside. And that's where the problem arises. Employees are looking for a job. Not entrepreneurs, their job begins before there even is a job. That's the difference. So going out of business, it's really unfortunate, but you see this happen often, every once in a while. And the thing is that only 1 out of 10 businesses will survive the first 5 years, and then out of that, then only 1%. So basically, in 10 years, only 1 out of 100 is going to survive. And I believe, personally, I believe the reason for it is because these people who are trying to step out to be entrepreneurs, they never understood that they actually can get self-educated to learn how to be an entrepreneur. Instead, they were trained to be employees, and unfortunately, employees cannot successfully run a business over a long period of time, and that's where these numbers come from. And what's happening is these entrepreneurs, they don't know any better. They're trying to own a job instead of trying to own a business, and that's what happens. Now, a ship is safe in the harbor, but that's not what the ships are meant for. We all are the ships. You're the ships. Each one of you listening, each one of us are made in our own beautiful way. We all have our own talents, our own gifts. We're all created for something to feel successful in life and to help other people and contribute. I think we all have different levels of different things. And if we just sit in the harbor because we're afraid of the big waves of the open sea. The problem with that is that we're never able to utilize the very things that we were made with, those very giftings, those intelligences, and we're not able to show that or help other people with it. And so it's really a sad thing to be to see that thing locked up. But like Chris also mentioned about the car, it's kind of funny. He's talking about all these things. The car that just sits there, it just rots away. It's meant to be driven. And so same with the ship. And here's what the problem is I think people stay in the harbor, so to speak, is because they're trying to keep job security. You know, you got to have job security. You got to get a good education so you can get a good high-paying job. You know, you hear these kind of cliches. And what is all that for? It's for job security, because the generations before us, they grew up in an era where it was industrial age. In industrial age, that was true. That was something you needed to do. Unfortunately, that same mentality does not work today. We're not in that kind of society anymore. We're in information age, technology age. It's different. And so they're working for a steady paycheck. And they say that those people that are entrepreneurs are risk takers, and it's just they can't believe people would step out and do something like that. You know, it's not in this day and age. But actually, I see it as the actual risk taker is the person who is working for job security, not the employee necessarily, but the person working for job security and a steady paycheck, because they're counting on something that's not here yet. It's the future. Remember, the future is not real. And what they're doing is they're putting their money in savings. And we already know, I mean, you guys are in ISN, you probably already understand, you know, saving money is a losing battle. You can't even keep up with inflation, let alone anything else. So, okay, so we got 3 birds here. There's 3 birds on a fence. 2 of them decide to fly away. So metaphorically, I'm asking you, how many are on the fence if 2 decide to fly away? Well, obviously you would think 1. Well, no, it's not true. There's still 3 birds on the fence. Everybody talks about doing stuff. You know, they say, well, I'm going to go start a business. I'm going to do that. You hear lots of talk about things, but everybody stays. It's funny because they still, you can see them 5 years later and they're still doing the same thing. Why is that? It's because they're programmed out of fear. If they jump off of this fence, something might get them. You know, they might fall. They might not be able to fly. They, you know, all these thoughts are programmed into the mind. But it's about time we actually step out and do something. Thomas Edison says, I have not failed. I have just found 10,000 things that don't work. Can you imagine failing 10,000 times? If he was working for somebody else, he would have been fired for that. And Michael Jordan, he said, I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's why he succeeded, by failing. So he learned every time he failed. And so one of the important things here, another key takeaway point, if you guys remember just a couple things from this, when you do fail, because everybody fails, when it happens, it's so vital that you don't blame it on someone else, because if you do, that painful failure and the resources it costs you and the time, all that is wasted, because you won't learn from it if you blame. It's just a natural fact. You cannot learn when you blame. When you finally self-inspect, and even if it was somebody else's fault partly, there's always a part of it that you can look at and say, what could I have done different? So that's so important. So basically, just learn and grow. That's all we can do. We can learn and grow, and I guarantee you if you do it, there will be success after success after success. You'll be more successful than you ever imagined you could be if you keep looking at every area where you failed and learn from it. Samuel Smiles says, practical wisdom is only to be learned in the school of experience. Precepts and instruction are useful so far as they go, but without the discipline of real life, they remain of the nature of theory only. So the process of learning, we got to make sure that that process is our main focus, not the end goal, the process. Spend 5% of your time on planning out the end goal, but spend 95% of your time focusing on the process that you're in. And this baby, I think of when I seen this, I had to put this on here because this made me think about, when we were just little, just learning how to walk. And, if some of you on here maybe have kids and grandkids, you watch these little toddlers walking and they fall down, they get back up again, and we're scared for them, but they don't look that scared. They just get back up again, they start walking again, and they keep falling. They might fall hundreds of times, and eventually they start walking, and then they start running, and then they start riding bikes. They don't look around and get embarrassed because someone sees them fail, and they don't get afraid of, falling again, because if they did, I mean, we wouldn't be walking today. So it's kind of that it's kind of a thing to think about how our minds back then were able to learn at such a rapid pace. And if we could just get our minds back to that lack of fear and being able to do that, I think that we would be able to grow. Everybody's always astonished at how fast young kids and babies learn so quickly. And I know there's something to do with that psychologically, but I also believe that a lot of it comes because as we get older, we start realizing more things that could happen that are bad, and so that kind of stops us from moving forward. So here's what happens. Here's one of the things that stops us from moving forward. We get into school, and then they start teaching us to memorize everything. You got to memorize, otherwise, you're not gonna pass and get a good grade. And the problem with this process is it slows our learning process way, way, way down. And then it becomes, well, now some people are really good at reading and memorizing. Some people, that's their genius, that's their intelligence. And then we start seeing those people, like for me, that's not my genius. And I see that with someone else, and I'm thinking, well, I must not be as good as them. And that's especially at the age of development when you're, in school, teenage years, things like that. You have such a confidence issue. So fear of failure is really being bombarded in the school years with that. So what can we do? We need to learn, just as young children learn. We need to learn by doing and stop being afraid to do. This 20/20 thing, you hear people say, well, hindsight's 20/20. Well, that is true. Hindsight is 20/20. But the problem is that most people don't turn around and look and see what they did wrong to find out how to fix it. So hindsight's only 20/20 if you examine what you did wrong and you don't blame other people. But unfortunately, most people would learn from their mistakes if they weren't so busy denying them. And that is so true. It's either denial or it's blaming. If we would get away from that, and we can, because remember we talked about earlier, it's a choice. Once you make that choice, you can have, you can learn from this 20/20 hindsight. Here's a model that I personally started going by, and I love it because I choose to never fail. I either win or learn. And I love it because that word fail has been replaced with learn. So I don't feel like every time I make a mistake or something happens, I don't feel like it's failure anymore. I feel like, oh, this is a great learning. This is a great learning lesson. This is a point of learning. And that's how I look at it. I don't look at it as failure, because once you remove that word fail and replace it with learn, all of a sudden it totally changes your mindset. Everything that you do is totally different. You visualize everything differently. Everything is positive instead of negative. And it's amazing what one small word can do. Now here is, we're going to switch into this. This is another issue that we're dealing with. And you got 4-star general and former Secretary of State in the U.S. here. His name is Mike Mullen, and they're not applauding him for this quote that I'm about to talk about. Of course, they wouldn't like this quote, but that's the best picture I found of him. Mike said there's 2 top threats for all first world countries, and you would think terrorism and war, but he said those are not the top 2 threats. The top 2 threats are national debt in our school system. We'll talk about national debt another time. That's a really important subject, but right now we're talking about the school system. And he says those are our top 2 threats, not just in the U.S., in the U.K., Europe, any first world country. Those are the top 2 threats, because it's almost like a virus infiltrating your computer system. You don't even see it. It infiltrates into one of your systems in your computer, and all of a sudden it starts affecting everything. And that is what has happened. War and terrorism, you kind of can see it. It's pretty in your face. And here is why he's saying that. When you're in school, you're not taught, you're trained. And so, the thing is we are not meant to learn like an animal learns. Human beings have a much more powerful mindset. We should be able to learn with critical thinking. We should be able to learn by having an individualism and not be trained, not be fall in line. Do I have to raise your hand to use the restroom when you're in school? Those kind of things. That just doesn't work right. It'll get people to fall in line if you do that out of fear, but what it lacks to do is it lacks to get people to use the giftings that they've been born with, and it stops people from being able to follow that path. And so and people are unhappy generally because of that. And here's why: the teaching is an industrial age teaching. Again, this teaching probably most of it would have worked maybe a long time ago, maybe, but it's just old-fashioned. It doesn't apply today, and it's really unfortunate, because what happens is kids are shoved through like this assembly line of robots, just like you see in the picture here, and they're pushed through a cookie cutter approach of teaching. And I don't know how you could do that because we're not centralized beings, we're individuals. And the problem with it is you got that the one person, they didn't fall in line, they didn't quite get what they need to, so they pull them out, stick them in the back of the line, and then they label them with a disease called attention deficit disorder. That actually, attention deficit disorder, the ADD, was actually created by teachers quite a while ago now, that they discovered that that's what it was, and they started medicating kids on it. And what happens is when you medicate, and I'm not all against the medication, all that stuff. This isn't a conspiracy theory type talk that we're going to go into today. This is just about what's actually happening with our individualized selves. When a kid is medicated from that, they actually are dulled down, and so when they're being dulled down, everybody has their own areas of expertise, their own intelligences, and they can't access that intelligence anymore. And they're being forced in a line. Everybody's being forced to learn a certain way, and school basically only teaches two different intelligences. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through here. We all have our own strengths, we all have our own weaknesses, and we all have our own geniuses. We're going to talk about this. This is the 8 different intelligences. There's at least 8, and Professor Howard Gardner has discovered these, and it's really important. We're going to talk about, let's start with the verbal linguistic, the word smart, and then to logical smart. We'll go around clockwise from there. And the reason I want to start with these two is because these two are taught in school. But again, if you say you have an intelligence in body kinesthetics, you're probably not going to do so well when you're in school, because your way of learning doesn't fit their agenda. And so this verbal linguistic here, that's basically just being able to read and write, to memorize things really well, that kind of thing. People who like poetry and do puzzles, things like that, they're probably really intelligent in this area. And if you are in that area, then you probably did fairly well in school. Logical smart, that's logical mathematical. You're able to do numbers really well. You can recognize patterns, those kind of things. This area also is taught in school. And again, if you're good at either one of these or both of these, you probably excelled in school, and that was probably a great time for you while you're in school. But unfortunately, this is only 2 of the 8. So what about the other 75% of people? They didn't feel so smart in school, and it's because their intelligence came from somewhere else. And so they were trying to be forced into one of these categories that just didn't do it for them. One of the next ones is the naturalistic. That's being aware of how things work, and like plants, animals, how things on the earth, how they work together. Someone who would go into like biology or something like that, they learn that way. Then you have intrapersonal. Intrapersonal is a really important one. This one is not taught in school either. It's someone who's an independent learner, someone who's self-motivated. They don't need other people to get them going. Basically, this one is important for an entrepreneur, and they are able to handle risk and emotions well. They can go without paychecks for a long period of time, that kind of stuff. Interpersonal person, intelligence from that area. And then you have visual spatial. Visual spatial is also not taught in school. It's people who learn from pictures. They like to learn from drawing. They tend to daydream a lot. If you find yourself daydreaming a lot, it's probably because you have a high intelligence in this visual spatial. You like to visualize things, and that's really good. We need people that have these all these different ways of learning and stuff. And then the next one is musical. Musical, you might think of band, or you might think of orchestra, or you might think of music class. That's not what is being taught in school. Those are just taking people that already have the gifting, and they're just playing instruments. But to be able to learn everything in school based off of one of these 8 pies of different intelligences, that would be the key. Take, for instance, body kinesthetics. That is a hands-on learner. Probably like 50% of people are hands-on learners, and this is not taught this way in most schools. If they would just encompass just this one with the verbal and the mathematical, they would probably grab more than half of the kids that are not doing so well in school. And then finally, the last one is interpersonal. Interpersonal is the kind of person that is social. They like talking to people, being around people, usually pretty popular, that kind of stuff. And they're usually great communicators, have good street smarts. Also, this one is another important one for entrepreneurs as well. But going on a little bit further here, there is basically just three basic areas of education that we, in today's age, that we need to be fluent in, and academic is only one of them. And that's the two things we talked about over here. And those academic ones, there's studies that have been done that show that 100 hours of concentrated learning and acceptance of learning, you could actually learn everything you need to know in those topics. Imagine what you could have done with the other 12, 13 years of schooling, if you would have just knocked that out in 3 weeks. The second one is professional education, understanding things of profession. Financial is so critical, and probably the best thing that's taught in school, or the most in the financial realm, is how to write a check, if even that. They just don't teach anything financial, and that's so critical, and that's why so many people get into money problems when they get out of school. Okay, now we're going to go into, we just talked about the 8 different intelligences. Everybody is born with natural abilities. These are just things that you can see from even little kids, just from the time they're born. And the really cool thing about these natural abilities that we're born with is that we can actually develop them. So there's natural, all of us have different levels of different natural abilities, and there's 4 different ones. The first one is a physical natural ability. This is basically, it's just in the muscles. So we're going to talk about the different places in the body that these 4 natural abilities are in. People who have good muscle memory, quick reflexes, things like that. And then you have the mental natural ability. That, of course, is in the mind. You tend to think about things a lot. You want to process thoughts. Emotional. This one is in the stomach or the gut. This one is basically when it comes to life challenges, you can handle it and you don't get so stressed out. So if you have that ability, you probably are high in the emotional natural ability. And then the fourth one is spiritual, and what I mean by spiritual is it's something that comes from the heart. So artists, poets, religious leaders, things like that is one of the natural abilities. And this physical one is number 1 because you cannot do anything in life without any of these things without first taking movement or action. So that's why that's at the top. Spiritual is at the bottom because it's the foundation. You think of somebody who has a low spiritual natural ability, and what I immediately think of is I think of Scrooge in the movie Scrooge. He's got all that money and he doesn't want to give 1 penny away, and nobody likes a greedy wealthy person. It just gives a bad taste in your mouth. That would be someone who has a very low ability in their spiritual side, in their heart, and that also can be increased. So somebody who has a high ability would be someone who's very giving of their time and resources, and they want to help other people. They want to see them succeed. And the important thing about all this is any one of these 4, if you're lacking in them, you can increase it. That's what this area is. It's really, really, really good. So the other section we're going to talk about is, so we got all these mindsets, these bad mindsets, and it's just like, what do we do with them, and it's really, again, going back to the whole point, this is a choice. We want to reach new levels. Then if we want to reach new levels, we have to unschool ourselves from these old negative mindsets, and the only way to do that is to throw out the garbage. We need to identify any wrong thinking in our mind so that we can grab it, get rid of it, replace it with something that's good, and then we can move forward. But it's a choice that we have to make. So one of the other things that we've been trained to do in school that we need to identify, and that is to compete. So you think about it, when you're in school, you got your tests, exams, spelling bees, all of these things are trained to go against somebody else to try to beat them, so bigger, better, faster, and it really doesn't change when you get into the adult world of working. You get reviews, and people are trying to climb the corporate ladder, and they're stepping on people to get up there. It's kind of it almost seems childish, but you know what? That's what we're trained to do. So the problem is there's nothing wrong with a little competition, but what we have to understand is the single focus on competition can cause nothing of great value to be accomplished. That's what we have to understand. So what then? What does it do? Why is it so bad? The problem with it is with competition is it causes that level of ostracizing. And the thing with ostracizing is that, most of it is all just in our own head. It's the way we think about doing things. And That's why most people are scared to death of public speaking. Some people would rather face death, and that's been proven. I think it's something like 75% of people would rather face death than have to get up and do public speaking. And it's just, it's really unfortunate because everybody has something to offer. And I think that if everybody realized that, I think that would change how people would view that. So what's the opposite then? Cooperation. Cooperation is the solution. Competition is okay in its own right, but cooperation is the exact answer. And unfortunately, if you're in school and you cooperate, that's called cheating. And a little humorous picture with Mr. Bean. And then we got also if you do it in government, it's called treason. So cooperation is unfortunate that it's viewed as it's given such a bad name, and I think it's because it's such a good solution that I think some people are afraid of that. And what happens with cooperation is it's revolutionary. If we could teach this to young kids starting out, and then even as adults grasp it, it would create communities, and communities are bigger than teams. Communities are close-knit groups that are set out to accomplish a mighty goal, all seeking in the same focused direction. Cooperation will cause that to happen. And I got some people here that probably thinking about, well, this might be, but what if I fail? I just don't know if I can step out, and I want to start a business where I can teach people to cooperate and lead teams of people, but I'm afraid I might lead them astray, or I might fall down, and the whole thing will fall apart. And that's just self-doubt. And I just want you guys to know every single person in the world faces self-doubt, and I'm going to show a few people that face much self-doubt. I mean, probably more than most of us on here, if not all of us, and they were still successful. You might have heard of these 7 gentlemen: Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, Ted Turner, Richard Branson. All founded great companies. Every one of these people, do you think that they've ever faced self-doubt? Most people say, no, man, they're the most successful people in the world. There's no way that these people are going to ever face that. They're different. They're not like me. But let me tell you something. All 7 of these guys failed school. Do you think they had self-doubt? I would say that they had more self-doubt than most of us had. But they still had something great to offer the world, and they decided to step out and face their fear anyway and just do it. And look what's happened. We got GE Electric, we got Ford Motor Cars, Bill Gates, and they wouldn't have Microsoft, Steve Jobs, Apple and Pixar, Dell Computers, Ted Turner, he started CNN, Richard Branson with Virgin. I mean, these are things that have changed and revolutionized our lives. All because they weren't afraid to step out. So I thank them for stepping out and not being afraid. If it wasn't for them, life would be a little bit harder. And so why were they successful? That's the question. Why were they successful? And how come most of these businessmen make more money than the people who work within this schooling industry? We have to wonder, what's the difference here? And I think the answer is real simple. In school, their job is to take something simple like 1 + 1 and to make it complicated like it equals calculus. I think that's where the issue comes from. These gentlemen, these 7 guys we just talked about, what they did was the exact opposite. So look at what the world's doing, and a lot of times you can just flip it around, do the opposite, and then all of a sudden everything becomes clear. What they did was they took this simple, this complicated mess that they were left with, and they simplified it for people. They basically solved the complexity problem. The more people you can solve the complexity problem for, then the more successful you're going to be. I mean, it's just an obvious answer. Make things simple. And so I just want to kind of talk about this journey that we've been kind of on here. And you see Bilbo here, and we're talking about he's getting ready to head on a journey. This whole process that we're going through, it's important to understand that it's not about the end goal. We have to focus on the journey right in front of us. We have to focus on today. What are we doing today? What can we accomplish today? And when we do that, we can soon realize that that you have to do one of 3 things, or all 3 things: keep trying, keep failing, and keep learning. And if you notice, all 3 of those all take action on your part. Nobody else can do it. It has to be a choice that you make, and then when you make that choice to take action, then nothing's going to stop you. Your success is in your hands. That's the one thing that we've never been taught, and I want you guys to understand right now that your success is completely in your hands, nobody else's hands. So I want to finish up here talking about Helen Keller. Most of you know and understood that she was blind and deaf, and you know, it's just it's amazing to me that someone could enjoy life without two of your main senses. And so I want to finish with a quote. She said, "Life is a daring adventure or nothing." So with that being said, think about those three birds on a fence. You can stay on the fence of your life, metaphorically speaking. You can stay on that fence just like the rest of those birds, or you can fly off and do your own thing and be successful. But remember, it is your choice, nobody else's. It's your choice. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Yeah, that was absolutely fantastic. I really